Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive.
Yep.
This time, we are going back in time to late 2016, just after the election of President Trump.
Hmm.
We're going to be looking at a financial news segment from that time, discussing the November jobs report.
Okay.
So right as this new administration is getting ready to take charge,
Yeah.
and our sources are voices from
Okay.
that moment.
Right.
We have economic experts Steve Moore and Andy Puzder, both of whom were advisors to Trump at the time.
Got it.
So this is really a chance for us to kind of look back and understand how economic data gets filtered through the lens of politics,
Okay.
especially during a time of transition and change.
Yeah, this is fascinating because we're not just looking at the numbers. We're hearing how these numbers were interpreted
Right.
by people who would actually be shaping economic policy
Exactly.
in the very near future.
All right, so let's jump right in. This November jobs report said that 227,000 new jobs were created. Sounds pretty good on the surface,
Yeah.
but the unemployment rate actually went up to 4.2%.
So more jobs, but also higher unemployment. How does that work?
Right. It just shows how you can look at the same data and emphasize different things
Right.
and come to different conclusions.
Yeah.
And while the overall number's pretty good, Moore and Puzder both called the report decent, not great.
Interesting.
They were concerned about the types of jobs that were being created, especially the fact that manufacturing jobs were declining.
Mm.
So right away, we're seeing a hint of the Trump administration's focus
Uh-huh.
on bringing back manufacturing jobs to the U.S.
Yeah, so it sounds like for them, not all jobs are created equal.
Exactly.
And they also seem to be worried about government jobs increasing at a time when we have these large deficits.
Right. And keep in mind, Puzder came from a CEO background.
Right.
So he's much more in favor of private sector solutions than government intervention.
Mm.
There's a very clear ideological leaning,
Mm.
and it's something that would definitely play out during the Trump years.
So if they're not so thrilled about government jobs, what kind of jobs are they looking for?
Well, Puzder specifically said he wants to see more full-time jobs created, not just any job.
Okay.
And this might suggest some concerns about the rise of the gig economy and part-time work,
Yeah.
where people often lack the benefits and stability of full-time employment.
Makes sense. A lot of people would probably prefer full-time work for exactly that reason.
Absolutely.
But a strong job market doesn't mean that all of our problems are solved.
Of course not.
We still have this massive national debt to deal with.
That's a big one. And actually, this source material includes a pretty dire warning from Penn Wharton.
Oh.
They say we only have about 20 years to get this debt under control before we risk defaulting.
Wow.
That's a serious ticking time bomb.
But Moore seems pretty relaxed about it. Like he's sure that economic growth will just solve the problem on its own.
That's a very classic supply-side argument.
Right.
Cut taxes, reduce regulation, and the economy will grow enough to generate more tax revenue.
Mm.
And that extra revenue will shrink the debt as a percentage of GDP. Of course, whether that actually works in practice is a whole other debate.
Right, of course. And then there's this mention of a DOGE efficiency commission.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, just the name alone makes me wonder if they're serious.
It's definitely a strange one.
You have this incredibly serious issue, the government spending and national debt.
Yeah.
And then they name the commission after some silly internet meme. It's odd.
Right. It makes you wonder if they were trying to downplay the seriousness of the situation.
Hmm.
Or maybe it was just a sign of the times.
Yeah, maybe. But they're talking about finding hundreds of billions of dollars in cuts.
Huge amounts.
You'd think somebody would notice that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where could they possibly find that much to cut?
It's a good question. It's worth thinking about what you would cut if you were in charge of balancing the budget.
Yeah.
Where do your own priorities lie?
Mm.
What are you willing to sacrifice to get that debt down?
Interesting.
These are the tough choices that policymakers have to grapple with.
Okay, so we've got jobs, we've got debt, we've got the DOGE Commission. Is there any good news in this whole economic picture?
Well, there is one thing that gets Puzder particularly excited.
What's that?
The appointment of Paul Atkins to the SEC.
Hmm.
And what's interesting for us, looking back from 2024, is that even back then, Atkins was already talking positively about digital assets.
Ah.
And he was criticizing the regulations that were driving a lot of crypto development overseas.
I see. So Puzder sees this appointment as a positive thing.
Absolutely. He believes that less regulation will lead to more innovation
Okay.
and ultimately boost business confidence.
But couldn't that also lead to more risk?
Possibly,
Yeah.
especially in a new and volatile market like crypto was back then.
Yeah.
Less regulation could potentially expose investors to more danger.
Right. So it's a bit of a trade-off.
It's the classic dilemma.
Uh,
How do you encourage innovation while still protecting investors and maintaining market integrity?
right.
It's never an easy balance to find. And with crypto and all these new disruptive technologies coming up, it becomes even more challenging.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about. Jobs, debt, regulation, and now crypto is in the mix too.
It is.
It's fascinating to see these early glimpses of the Trump administration's economic approach,
Definitely.
but it's also a bit overwhelming.
Understandably.
Yeah.
But this is just the beginning. There's a lot more to explore as we continue this deep dive.
Right. It's like we're opening a time capsule, seeing the early seeds of the economic trends that would shape the next few years.
Exactly. And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to uncover.
Okay, so we've talked about how the incoming Trump administration was really focused on job creation,
Right.
especially in the private sector. But at the same time, they were also inheriting this huge national debt.
Yeah.
And that's where things start to get really interesting.
It's a tough balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah.
You want to stimulate the economy, you want to create jobs,
Right.
but then you have this massive debt hanging over your head.
Right. And that brings us back to the Doge Efficiency Commission,
Yeah.
which I gotta say is a pretty wild name for a government commission.
It's definitely memorable.
You've got this serious issue, government spending and debt, and then you name the commission after a meme.
It is a little jarring, isn't it?
Yeah.
You almost wonder if they were trying to make light of the situation.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they thought a funny name would make these deep cuts easier for people to swallow.
It's possible,
Yeah.
but no matter what you call it, the impact of those cuts would be very real.
For sure. We're talking about potentially major reductions in government programs and services.
Exactly.
So where do these cuts come from? What could they possibly trim without people feeling the pain?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it really forces us to think about what we value as a society.
Hmm.
What are we willing to invest in?
Right.
What are we willing to cut back on?
It's easy to say cut government waste, but when you actually look at the budget, it gets a lot more complicated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where those ideological differences we talked about start to come into play.
Right.
If you believe in a smaller government, you might be more willing to make deeper cuts to social programs.
Right.
But if you favor a stronger social safety net, those cuts could be really worrying.
So the Doge Efficiency Commission is about more than just saving a few bucks here and there.
Right. It's about a fundamental shift in thinking about the role of government.
Right, exactly. And it's important to remember that these choices, they have real consequences.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Cuts to education could impact future generations.
Absolutely.
Cuts to healthcare could leave vulnerable people at risk.
Exactly.
Mm.
These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They affect real lives.
This is why I find this whole topic so fascinating. It's economics, but it's also about our values and our vision for society.
It's all connected.
Mhm.
Economics is about more than just money. It's about choices, trade-offs.
Yeah.
It's about the kind of world we want to build.
Yeah.
And these decisions about government spending, they reflect those choices.
So we've got this looming debt, this commission looking for major cuts, and a lot of questions about what those cuts would mean for everyday Americans. It's a lot to digest.
It is. But it's important that we engage with these questions, think critically about these policies, and have those tough conversations about what our priorities are as a nation.
Right. And I think it's a good reminder that we're not just watching the economy from the sidelines.
Right.
We're active participants.
Exactly.
Our choices, our votes, our voices, they all contribute to shaping the economy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the more informed we are, the better we'll be at making those choices and advocating for the kind of economy we want.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about another key part of the incoming Trump administration's approach to the economy.
Okay.
Deregulation.
Right. And this goes back to what we were saying before about Paul Atkins being appointed to the SEC.
Right.
Remember, Atkins was already expressing concerns about excessive regulation, especially when it came to digital assets.
Right. And Puzder seemed really excited about that. Like he saw it as a way to unleash innovation.
Exactly. The thinking there is that less regulation means more economic activity, more investment, and eventually more growth.
But couldn't that also create more risk? I mean, especially with something like crypto, which was still a pretty new and unpredictable market back then.
That's the constant dilemma.
Yeah.
How do you balance fostering innovation with protecting consumers and the integrity of the market?
Right. It's not easy.
It's never easy. And with crypto and all these disruptive technologies emerging, it becomes even harder.
So the appointment of Atkins to the SEC was a clear signal that deregulation was coming, but it also raised these big questions about what the consequences would be, both good and bad.
Right. And it highlights how important it is to stay informed about these developments and really think critically about the role of regulation in a rapidly changing economy.
For me, this is where things start to get really interesting. We're seeing these early signs of the Trump administration's economic philosophy.
Yeah.
This focus on job creation, the belief in the power of the private sector, the commitment to deregulation.
Right.
But at the same time, we're seeing the potential tensions and challenges that go along with that.
Yeah, it's like we're watching the first act of a play. We've met the main characters. We have a sense of the setting. We're starting to see the central conflicts.
But there are still so many unanswered questions. How will these policies actually play out in the real world? What will the impact be on everyday people? How will these decisions shape the economy for years to come?
Right, and those are the questions we're going to keep exploring as we delve deeper into this pivotal moment in economic history.
In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to circle back to that DOGE Efficiency Commission and try to really analyze what those proposed spending cuts could mean.
Okay.
We'll also take a look at Paul Atkins' time at the SEC and examine the long-term consequences of deregulation in the financial sector. All right, so we've talked about the jobs report, the debt, and the push for deregulation.
Right.
But there's one more piece of this puzzle we need to look at.
And it might be the most interesting one, the DOGE Efficiency Commission.
Yeah.
A name that's hard to forget, for sure.
Yeah.
But behind that kind of meme name is a serious idea.
Yeah.
They wanted to find hundreds of billions of dollars in cuts to government spending.
Hundreds of billions.
That's just a massive amount of money.
It is.
Makes you wonder, could they even do that without some pretty big consequences?
Well, it's important to remember anytime we're talking about government spending.
Yeah.
We're talking about programs, services, things that real people rely on.
Right.
Those hundreds of billions, they represent real impacts on people's lives.
Exactly.
Right.
So where would those cuts even come from? What programs would be on the chopping block?
Well, this source material doesn't give us specifics,
Right.
but we can make some educated guesses.
Okay.
Entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare,
Right.
those are often targets when people want to reduce spending.
Yeah.
Defense spending is another big one. And then you have all the social safety net programs,
Food stamps, welfare, unemployment benefits.
all the programs that help people who are struggling.
Exactly. And that's where those ideological differences really matter.
Right.
This DOGE Efficiency Commission wasn't just about cutting waste.
Yeah.
It was about changing how we think about the role of government. How much responsibility does the government have to provide a safety net?
Yeah, that's a big question.
That's the underlying question here.
It seems like this commission with this kind of silly name
Yeah.
was actually pushing for some pretty big policy changes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that economics isn't just about numbers.
Right.
It's about values priorities,
Yeah.
the kind of society we want to build.
This whole deep dive has shown how much economic decisions are tied to political belief.
For sure. It's not just about the economy. It's about our vision for the future.
Understanding those underlying beliefs is so important if we want to make sense of economic policies.
Absolutely. You got to look beyond the surface.
And see how they might actually affect people.
Yeah.
So we started with this jobs report that seemed pretty simple on the surface.
Right.
And we ended up talking about debt spending cuts, deregulation, the very role of government.
It's all connected.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. But that's what these deep dives are for.
Right.
We want to go beyond the headlines.
Yeah.
Look at all the different angles
Help people understand how all these economic events fit together.
and how they might impact their lives.
We don't just want to give you information. We want to
Yeah.
help you understand what's really going on.
Give you a deeper understanding of the forces shaping the economy.
Because knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
The more you know about economics, the better choices you can make.
For yourself, your family, your community.
We hope this deep dive has made you curious,
Yeah.
made you want to learn more about economics.
It's a fascinating subject.
Keep asking those questions, keep learning,
Absolutely.
and until next time, keep diving deep.